a door opens, there's this incredible room full of wonderful things looking at me, and I've got to pick out what's actually relevant now. And so I get a lot more questions than I get answers. I found a way to ground me, to actually bring me down into what is happening, and to get a really good look at it at an inside level, not just at an intellectual level, was to draw the charts of the current conjunction. And of course, as soon as you see the series of the current conjunction, you realise, well, it didn't just emerge out of thin air. Where did it come from? And I've ended up with a cycle that starts in 1805. And to me, at the moment, that looks like the current cycle. That what we're in at the moment is the next step in the current cycle. And if you just forget for the time being that 1805 is a long way away, it isn't really, not in historical terms. We don't live very long, really. Not in terms of the great cycles. And the reason that this particular conjunction is so traumatic for many people is a double thing. First of all, it's what it hits in their natal charts. But it isn't just that. It appears to me at the moment, this time last year, I talked about the Saturn Uranus cycle, and I'm trying very hard not to cover the same ground, but I'll have to cover it to a certain extent. That is that Saturn is the structurer. It is the form maker, the stabilizer. It is what sets the limits, what defines the limits. I don't believe it sets the limits, but Saturn is the symbol for the limits that we experience. And David Ingram had a lovely way of putting this years ago. I remember hearing him say, and it was something I clung to because it made so much sense to me, and that is, he said that Saturn is what we most fear and what is most valuable to us. And a lot of people are frightened of Saturn. But when we embrace it, it's rather like plucking a thistle out of the ground. If you're pulling a thistle out, the best thing you can do is grab it really hard first off, and it doesn't get you, and then pull. If you take it slowly, you get badly hurt. And with Saturn, it's the same. You have to you can't rush with Saturn, but you do have to go in and deal with it. And what the Saturn-Uranus cycle is telling us is taking us to the next step beyond Saturn. Thank you. That gave me lots of confidence. I'm sick of the charts falling off the wall. That was my theory from before. Just forget it for now. I'll put them up separately on the glass with blue tack later, which is what I wanted to do originally. The thing is that with the discovery of the outer planets, humankind's consciousness grew immensely. It was a tremendous shock. If you were in Dennis's workshop this morning, where he was talking about the foundations of astrology, the trip going way, way back in time, and how you can see how it's grown from before we had houses, all kinds of things. Thousands of years we've been doing astrology. And in that time, the outer limit was Saturn. And then in 1781 we discovered Uranus. And with that, I believe that we took another leap in awareness and consciousness. And I believe that with every discovery of an outer planet, we take another step. And that we don't know what it is for the time being, but that doesn't matter. We grow into it. We're rather like children with a new toy. We've got to experience it for a while. And I suspect we've actually got to wait for Neptune to go from where it was found to the same point before humanity really has a clear grasp of what Neptune means. And the same with Pluto. It's going to be a long time before we really are comfortable with Pluto and the Plutonian energies. And we've only known about it for 38 years, and it's a very short time to really grasp the inwardness of it. However, we were being prepared in 1897. with the 1897 conjunction. There were 3 conjunctions in 1897, the same as there is this year with the Saturn Uranus cycle. And that was where I started getting really quite excited about things. Because Pluto hadn't been discovered, I left it out of the chart. And that was my real beginning point. I started off with the present one. I went back to 1890, back to 42, and discovered that things were actually emerging, that the tone of the 42 to 88 era was entirely different from the tone of the 87 to 42. And going back, every time I go back further, I find the same kind of rhythm emerging. So it seems as though the first step in the double cycle, if we take it 1988, which is where we are now, and we've got 3 conjunctions this year. 1942, that was the real beginning point. Why were there 3 conjunctions in 88 and 1 in 42?
Judith, I got a darker map here.
No, it's the only one I've got. Just a moment. Is this one? Would it come off? No, that's a personal thing. The thing is, there was a single conjunction in 1942 and a triple one here. Then I found there was a triple one in 1897. And the pattern that seems to me to be emerging at the moment is that we have a double followed by a single, and a triple followed by a single, and the triple acts as a marker for the beginning of the double cycle. So in 1942, could somebody go to the office and see if they've got a marker, a dark one, because we can't see. The origin of that cycle, it turned out when I looked at the historical correspondences, was in fact 1897. And I've got to do this for you to grasp what the meaning of this time is. In 1897, there were some really amazing things happening. All the stuff that was going to emerge in the 20th century was already on the way. People were toying with the idea of flight. People in fiction, authors, were toying with all the things that have actually happened in this century. Only, of course, it's happened a bit differently. But the thing that was really amazed me, that hit the button, was that in 1897, Marie Curie was fooling around with some pitch blende, which turned out to be radioactive, and she died of the consequences. But in the process, she discovered radium and polonium, she and her husband, but she was the prime mover. In 1942, in the actual year of the conjunction, the Manhattan Project was started. And Pluto is both of those. Pluto is the joining thing for those two. And Pluto was discovered in 1930. I believe that in the 1897 to 42 time, all the ingredients came together, including the uncovering of Pluto. And Pluto wasn't the only thing that happened in those years, but to me it is a kind of a marker that goes through. In 1942, nuclear energy was being developed, was being played around with. But between times, we had taken off, we'd started flight. In 1942, the first mechanical brain, a computer, was being constructed, and it was a huge affair, very clumsy by today's standards. Tapes, our tape deck, our familiar little thing that's winding away here. The very first of the tapes was being developed and made in 1942, in that period around there. And then from there on, we had this crazy, mad race that just went on. And I noticed that Saturn fooled around here for quite a bit until it came into the final conjunction. And I want to show you some of the charts that relate to that period, because this period grows out of that. Pause. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on these charts, these particular ones, but I want to show you just a series. This has a much more formed look about it. There's a cluster down here again with the Sun, Pluto, Neptune, the Moon, Mercury, retrograde, Venus. The conjunction is up near the midheaven in this chart, and this is for Wellington, New Zealand. Last year I had a lot of charts for Greenwich because I really take that as my base, but I realised that it's much more interesting to see what's happening here. And here is the final conjunction for that year. Right, there's a fixed cardinal T-square there. A fixed T-square, sorry. A fixed T-square that's there. Very heavy stuff, very tight. And here is the final conjunction chart for 1897. That hasn't got Pluto in it. I originally put Pluto in it and then discovered that no, if I leave it out, something interesting happens. Here we have the Moon, Neptune, Venus, Sun, Jupiter, a conjunction of Mars and Mercury, and the conjunction. It's got very little, it's only got a semi-square contacting it. And here's what happens if we put Pluto in. We end up with a grand triangle. The whole thing's got a much more dynamic sort of shape to it. The reason I want to show you that one, I'll put this one back on for you to see. That's without Pluto. You can see there's a trine here from the Moon to Neptune. That's an approaching trine. Squares, both first quarter squares here going off from the Moon, from the Sun and Jupiter, and an inconjunct going down there, plus a couple of trines and a couple of semi-squares. And that was the actual beginning point of this last cycle. And here's the current one. We have a trine, a square, and an inconjunct. The same as in the 87 chart. I'm sorry, can you hear? That October. This is the October one. I'll take you through the series later. But this really, the point I'm making with these is not a superstitious one. That is, I'm not saying that look what happened since 1897, therefore look what's happening to us. Here the trine, instead of it being between the Moon and Neptune, is between Mercury and Jupiter. And again it's a departing trine. I'm sorry, this time it's a departing trine. Before it was an approaching one, and the energy is different. The square this time is between the retrograde Mercury and Neptune. And the inconjunct is between Jupiter and Neptune. The point I want to make with this chart here is that the key to it is the missing Pluto. Pluto had a tremendous amount of stuff to do with what emerged following on from this conjunction, to a very large extent. it ruled it in many ways, with the discovery in 1930 and the playing around with the atom, all that research stuff that was going on. And the thing is that at the time, because we didn't know Pluto was there, if I had been talking to you in 1897, the key to this chart isn't actually on it. And I think we need to remember that when we come to a turning point, that we don't know what we don't know. If you stop and think about things that have happened since 1897 in the world, for ordinary people as well as worldwide, for politicians and rulers and things, it's just amazing. And we couldn't have talked to those people about heavier than air flight. Think about talking. My father was born in 1897. He would have been fascinated by Concorde, but it would have been no use talking to his father in 1897 about Concorde or supersonic flight. And I really feel the same energy coming through with this conjunction, with this triple conjunction that's taken such a long time to happen, taking such a long time to get into place, is that we need to be aware that this is actually of a different order from what we can grasp at the intellectual level. There's the October 88 third conjunction for this year. That being said, the considerations I find myself going into with this chart are that it is in Sagittarius. It is at some level concerned with wisdom. It is concerned with all the Jupiterian type things that we think of with Sag. But in fact it's starting a new set, a new step, if you like. It's taking the next step in the Saturn Uranus cycle. Because the first conjunction in this whole series happened in 1805, and at the halfway point in 1852, almost spot on with that second conjunction in that first set, New Zealand was declared to be a colony of Britain, of England. And that's the New Zealand map for that 1853 time. The stuff that was they were sending people out to New Zealand in 1805. They were doing the exploratory thing. And in 1853, New Zealand was seen to be part of the British Empire at that stage. And that came within months of the second conjunction in that 1805 cycle. That was a cardinal cycle. It started in Libra. The second one, the 1897 one, started in Scorpio. And its opposition phase was in 1942, during the Second World War, which is why I've got a whole lot of maps for it here of the Allies, of Britain. I've got one for Westminster, Paris, Berlin, one for Washington and one for Tokyo, the 1942 conjunction, which was the halfway point for this cycle. And if we say that Pluto is the key to this, and we look at the Hiroshima map for the conjunction, and I'm not talking about a transit to the Hiroshima map, which it truly is, but just drawing the map of the conjunction for Hiroshima. The ascendant is 26 degrees Sag, which is some people say the galactic centre. That is the directional galactic centre point. And that is where this present conjunction is taking place, actually in 28 degrees, 27.49 I think it is. And so the next step has got to be taken now to get beyond what came through with this. That was the fixed era, that was the fixed section of the cycle. So we started off with Libra in 1805. We went from the cardinal phase into the 1897 one was the fixed, and that began in Scorpio, and now we have the mutable energy one starting this year. And we're going from the Uranian phase, which was 1942 to 1988, into the Saturnian phase of the mutable section. Do you know the following through? That's what it feels like to me. And that's the theoretical base that I'm working from at the moment. I want to do research, I want to go through and see if the pattern that I'm seeing here is in fact there, or if this is just a hopeful thing in my own head. I really don't think it is. The similarities between the 1897 chart and our third one this year are really too astonishing for me to just accept as being a chance thing, and I want to follow that through. How though are we going to make this real for ourselves and our clients? Now, is there anything anybody wants to do with this at the moment, at this stage? Right. What I wanted to give you a chance... It is on, I think. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. The thing is that when we go through this cycle, when we go through these maps, we discover that the Scorpio one, which began in 1897 at 26 degrees Scorpio, had its midpoint, had its halfway time in 1942 at 30 degrees Taurus. Now those 2 degrees are really important for people whose charts we are doing now in relation to the current cycle. Because what's happening for these people who have their ascendant or who have a personal planet, well, any angle or a personal planet, any planet on those degrees, is feeling as though the ground is shifting from under their feet and they can't for the life of them work out what's happening. And this is something I've found again and again, that people have trigger points in their charts, that when you put this in as a transit to their chart and see it as for what it is, which is taking us beyond the purely personal, which is what Saturn is. Saturn is the last of the personal planets. Uranus is the first of the transpersonals. And it's sort of putting us in our setting, if you like. It's connecting us to something greater than ourselves and showing us who we are through our friends, if we go to the 11th house, through our friends, through our associates, through the people we belong to associations with. Any of the 11th house stuff, if you think of it in terms of that. And every time these two meet, it's making that personal stuff, taking it out beyond and making it into a social statement. And so people are feeling really... I find that people coming to see me have questions in their minds about things that are very clearly seen on the chart. I've got somebody here. This is a man who came to see me. And if you just look at his chart and say, okay, what have we got here? We've got, until you see this other stuff, until you see the pattern that has been in relation to this, and see it in terms of the social connections it makes, you just see this as, oh yes, you can say the Saturn Uranus conjunction is happening down here, but when you realise that his ascendant at the 1897 beginning of this double cycle, that his Venus is right on where the last conjunction was. What's shifting for him is that, he's got all fixed angles, for goodness sake, which isn't easy for him to shift in spite of this Gemini energy up here. If we take that Gemini energy there and see that what's happening for him is that this is shifting, the way his relation to the world is shifting. There's a tremendous change going on for him. And the stuff that was a given for him in terms of, like, what I see the Saturn Uranus cycle as being, as saying for people, is that whether or not we were born when that conjunction took place, or that conjunction took place, and nobody here is, that this whole last 90 years has sprung from that and emerged in a kind of way at that, in 1942 at that, and that is the social statement, right? That's the meeting place of the personal and society. And that's what people, so this is how people are connecting. That's the unconscious stuff. That's the stuff that's been out there in the community. And when you think it's been in Taurus, a nice, safe, practical, solid kind of sign, only it's been going through the energy stuff. It's been going through the electronics, the microchip, all that amazing stuff that has happened since 1942, and now it's slowing down, whether we like it or not. And the people who like that hyped up energy are finding it really hard now, because things are slowing down. And people say this to me in two different ways. They either say, I haven't got enough time for the things I've got to do, or they say, everything is so slow. It's taking longer to do things than I thought it was, than I think it will. And I found that working on this particular project, it's been terribly slow. I have found it extremely difficult to get to it from time to time. Now for this young man, it's the way he relates to the world that is shifting, and in particular that. And I know that's difficult, and I know this is a very obvious example. But I wanted to use an obvious example for the very first one. The things that you look for are what you always look for. You look for the situation of the two planets natally, and you look at the phase relationship that they're in. This is a gibbous one. From me, oh hang on, it's a trine, it's a gibbous. And so he has to have a great deal of flexibility and perseverance. This is it's not an easy, it's okay, you've got the trine and it sounds easy, but it's not in fact. He has to have flexibility and perseverance when it comes to Uranian type things. And he's getting a new view of himself. He's getting a new way of relating to the world. The whole thing is shifting. Where he thought he was, he no longer is. In his relationships with other people and in himself.
Why did you not have Pluto in that chart?
Because I'm talking about only the conjunction.
So you're not sort of going through.
No. No. Other ways it can connect with the chart.
Judith, I was listening to what you had to say about Pluto being amongst the changes, because I've got my son at 0 degrees Capricorn and I'm undergoing great change, but Pluto triggered it off. Pluto squeezed Saturn.
Right.
It basically triggered the whole thing off.
Yes, the transits to these will actually, you'll find that they act as for timing.
Yes.
But you'll find too that by the end of the year the changes will be different from what they seem at the moment. I feel as though, we'll come on to that in a minute. This woman came to see me. She has the thing that, in this case, there's nothing really outstanding on either of those points, but she has got that there. And so this time for her is tremendously a time of huge change. Huge change. Notice she has Saturn opposing her ascendant. Well, no, sorry, she doesn't have an ascendant, does it? Right. But she does have it opposing her sun. And so she's finding this extremely difficult. You have to look at the phase relationship of those two to see how they are experiencing it. And where they are experiencing it is shown there or in the last degrees of those two. And remembering it's going from a fixed energy, which it has been for 90 years, into a mutable energy. And it's a mutable Saturn energy. It's crazy, it's a mixed up lot. We're going to start playing with what has been emerging since 1805. With these charts, I have simply put in only what is necessary. The ruler of the last conjunction is here with her sun. Jupiter, which is the way she's going to connect to this conjunction now, because Jupiter is the dispositor of the conjunction, is up here at the beginning of Taurus. And here's the third one. Now, this is the chart of a young woman, and what she's doing with this time is she is exploring herself and the way she behaves in her relationships, very much like the first person on the first chart I showed you. He is exploring the way he relates to people through his Venus. She is altering her perceptions of her Mars. And that's the hidden connection with this conjunction that's happening in her 12th house. So that's what has to be looked at. You have to come back to these points and you can see what is shifting. Now what I wanted to do is to have you divide up into groups of 3, preferably with people you don't know, because it's very easy to get into a loop of what you know about people when you're doing this. Break up into groups of 3 and spend 15 minutes working on each chart of the 3 of you. So that 2 people or the 3 of you focus on one chart for 15 minutes and then the 3 of you focus on a different chart. And you do the same again. And this is to give you a feel, not so that you can tell the other people how you're experiencing it, if it's your chart, and I hope it is, and to give them useful feedback, and to also find out how the other people are seeing it, how the other people are approaching it, and how they're experiencing it. Because I think you get far more by looking at your own chart and exploring it in this way with other people who will see different things from what you do. One remarkable chart I saw had a lot of personal planet stuff, and when you looked at it, it was all there. It's a very clear statement. Once you start including that 30th degree Taurus and the 26th degree Scorpio. Now, can you break up into groups of 3, please? And it's a good idea to assign somebody as a timekeeper. And work on your own charts. So you look for where the conjunction is happening now, and you locate the earlier conjunction point. Yes. And you look at the phase relationship between the Saturn and the Uranus that they occupy on your chart, to see how you are feeling about this and connecting with it. So what we were just saying here is that if it isn't hitting anything in particular in the chart, you can still look at the positions of the natal Uranus and Saturn and put them together and find out where they are emerging now, where that conjunction is. The points of the 26 degrees Scorpio and the 30 degrees Taurus are to be used for people for whom there doesn't seem to be any specific connection, and yet they're going through great trauma. They're going through great and deep changes. And you can help them by looking at that and seeing what's changing on those degrees, what is on those degrees that is now undergoing a major shift. And it will emerge in a Uranian fashion in the house of the conjunction, the current conjunction. What this chart here that I'm holding, I wish I could show it to you. She has 26 degrees. Now we're thinking about the 26 degrees Scorpio. Her ascendant is 26 degrees Pisces. Would you actually like to write these down, because it'll make it much easier for you to see. I'd like to put it on here, but I haven't got the equipment to do that. So her ascendant is 26 degrees Pisces. Her midheaven is 29 degrees, is that correct? 26 degrees Sag, conjunct her natal Mars, fully conjunct. And Moon is at 26 degrees Scorpio.
So it's going to be a 26 Cancer too.
Also, there's a group down in Cancer. 29 degrees Cancer has Mercury, 25 degrees has Uranus, and 17 degrees has Jupiter. Now she's got a tremendous number of correspondences on her chart. But my feeling about this is that her MC really is important, yes. But the thing that's undergoing a mighty change for her is that 26 degree moon in Scorpio. And it's important for her that you can recognise that and say it's okay. You know, you're going through an inevitable growth phase. It's a big change. And the Mars ties in beautifully because it's the ruler of that. It's one of the rulers of that moon. And so the conjunction is squaring her ascendant, fully conjoining her MC and her Mars, and it's changing that moon profoundly. So she's coming into a new phase of life, and she'll look back and see that as part of her past in a very real way. And remember that at the moment, the final conjunction hasn't happened. And this is the thing to recognise. This is another thing that needs to be said for this year. Is that if we take the conjunctions for this year and look at the February one for Wellington, New Zealand, all up in the top there, the conjunction involves Mars at 23 degrees Sag, and that to me was the final, that was the final statement of the previous cycle. That was the end point. That was the point at which the old cycle departed, but the new one hasn't begun. But we all know for sure that there are mighty, mighty changes happening. And I've shown you a wee bit today of how you can focus in on, for the client, for yourself, what areas those changes are in, and what the meaning is for that person. So that's the end statement of the old cycle.
With the final step, this is in October,
Yes.
Can you then say that whatever it is changing is rounding off at that point?
I'm coming to that. Yes, you're asking what I'm. Now this is the 27th in New Zealand, 5:12 a.m. in New Zealand. There's still a lot up the top here. Jupiter is almost at the old conjunction point, and I feel very deeply that this conjunction on the 26th, 27th is in fact the point of the spiritual focus, when we can focus spiritually on what this conjunction means. We have shed the old, and it's like the infinity point. It's where if we put out, it's the point at which we can start to focus what will emerge. I'm going back to this two-stage stuff again.
I'm finding that Jupiter at 26, Taurus, is going to be trining Mars on Monday heaven at 26 Capricorn, and it's going to be in there for quite some time towards the end of the year.
Right.
So besides everything about, I was quite, when you said that 26, I thought, well, that's
Right. Right. So you've got, the funny thing for you people here is that you've got a Pisces, a Jupiter co-ruled Pisces talking to you about the conjunction, not just in terms of the physical stuff that's going. I really see that as unlocking some of the spiritual potential of the 42 conjunction. I feel as though somehow that we're able to make sense of what happened then. I can't really put it into words, but to me that is a profound statement, that Jupiter coming up to the point of the old conjunction. And of course it's the traveller. It takes us beyond again, doesn't it? Jupiter always expands us. It's the traveller, it's the wise one. Now, there's also a newsletter here that arrived today or yesterday, Earthlink. There are meditations being done on June the 26th, a global celebration of the spirit of love. Blend your thoughts, prayers, and meditations for peace and harmony. You might like to know about those. There are times there, we can actually photocopy this for you if you're interested in taking part. There are times, quite specific times, if you want to. Before this, I realised I had the feeling that this is the spiritual focus point. This is the point at which we can start gathering the materials. We've finished with the old. This is the inner statement of what is going to emerge in October. And in October, we have the third conjunction. With any luck? Or any luck? Yes. There we are. And I wanted to show you that compared with the 1897 one, to simply make this point, that we do not know what we do not know. That the key to the 1897 conjunction was Pluto, beyond our comprehension. I'm not saying there's going to be another planet emerging at the trine point on this, or squaring or anything. I think that probably all the raw material, if we are going into the mutable phase of this, of a 270-year cycle, I think that probably we're now going to start playing with